A lot of people are speaking, but they're really not trying to communicate. And so when I talk about speaking boldly, it's about what can you do? What kind of tools, what kind of tone, what kind of attitude and mentality can you bring to your conversation that allows the conversation to continue? Which is really what communication is about, right? If what you're saying shuts everybody up in the room, you probably are not speaking boldly.
Welcome once again. We're back. It's Relationships at Work, a leadership podcast helping you build workplace connections, improve culture, and avoid blind spots. I am your host, Russell Oliger, communications leadership expert, couple of decades, successful decades of experience in both those areas, and a whole heap of curiosity, just like yourself, on how we can make the workplace better. The fun continues. We are smack dab in the middle of our Work Human Live series from Colorado. That's where I recorded this a few weeks back. Last couple of Fridays, we talked to Jason Lauritsen on challenges to workplace connection. And then last week, it was Dr. Devin Steele on engaging and communicating through change. This is part 3 and of 6. We've got a few more weeks to go. Today, though, I'm pretty excited. It's Verna Myers. She's kind of a big deal. And I'm going to tell you all about her, which you may not need to know because you may have already heard of her before. Again, big deal. But first, I just want to mention as a communications guy, anytime I get to talk to others about communication, it really sort of piques that extra interest in me because I'm always curious about how others do things. When to talk, when not to talk, how to prepare when you have time, or prepare when it's something that happens in the moment. What do we do when it's speaking truth to power or sharing information that could be really uncomfortable for people? A truth that they don't really want to hear but kind of need to. This is a skill leaders have to embrace, because as I've said, if we can't communicate, we can't lead, period. And speaking boldly, which we're going to talk about today, falls under that. Let's learn from Verna. Hold on. And on the show today, we have Verna Myers, and here is why she is awesome. She is a DEI pioneer, highly sought after keynote speaker, and DEI consultant. She's the founder and president of the Verna Myers Company and was the first executive head of inclusion at Netflix. Verna is a Harvard-educated lawyer, best-selling author, TED speaker, and she owns her own trademarked quote, "Diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance." And we got to sit down and talk at Work Human Live a few weeks back in Colorado about speaking boldly. So let's learn how to do that with Verna. So we're outside. I keep moving around for Work Human Live. My guest today had a brilliant idea for us to get out onto the grass. And so you may hear some birds chirping in the background, which is fantastic. Today I'm with Verna Myers. I'm excited to talk about our topic today, which is about speaking boldly. And as a comms nerd, I'm very curious as to your approach to this, especially considering some of the cultures, challenging cultures that we can sometimes find ourselves in. But before we get to any of that, Verna, I've got a question, which is, what is your best or worst employee experience?
I have an experience that I'm going to try to leave some names out of.
Please do.
Okay, so I was in a leadership position and I was very unhappy with the decisions that the executives of the company had made about the future of the company. Now, there were two leaders. There was one leader who had made this decision, who was the CEO, and he came to me first to tell me that he was going to make this decision because he knew I would be unhappy with it. And we had our conversation, which was a little bit of an argument and a little bit of me listening and him listening or whatever, but he ultimately made the decision he was going to make. And in a larger meeting, when he announced the decision, I asked a follow-up question that wasn't about what I was upset about, but it was one of the areas that I thought would suffer as a result of this particular decision. And after I posed that question, the question was answered. And then that leader turned to me and said, Renee, do you want to tell everybody how you feel about the decision? Now, there must have been about 120 people in the room, all executives. And I thought to myself, okay, this is when you make a difference. This is when you speak the truth. And I spoke the truth as I saw it, and it was critical. And I explained why. And I also made it very clear that I wasn't against the people. I was really against what I thought would be a negative outcome of the decision, given where said we were trying to go, the commitment we were trying to make going forward. And after I finished, it was virtual, so everybody was writing, on the comment section, thank you, Renee, I appreciate your comments. It was millions of them. And there were ones coming to my phones, and they were all right. And afterwards, I thought to myself, what an incredible leader to invite that kind of feedback in a public space. He knew exactly what I was going to say. He knew it wasn't going to be complimentary of him or the decision, and yet he wanted to he made space for me, which meant he was recognizing he was making space for others as well. And that was kind of the most amazing experience I had in leadership, which was for a leader to be willing to throw himself under the bus so that I could say my thing. And it didn't change the ultimate decision, but it put in the room more considerations that would hopefully shape, and it did. If I look 2 years out from that decision, it went in the direction that I wanted it to go, and I think part of it was because I was willing to stand up and speak out, and it was not held against me.
And he would have had to have known you well enough, because if he pulled that on an introvert or somebody who didn't feel any psychological safety, that could have gone a very different way.
Yeah.
Very different way. But to have the confidence in the relationship with you and know you well enough that this is going to be, even though you probably felt like you were on the spot in the moment, but he knew enough that you were confident enough and strong enough that you could take that position. That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it was the faith. And a lot of I could have told you stories about when I felt betrayed in certain situations. In this situation, after the meeting was over, I picked the phone, I called him, and I said, I love you. He was like, I love you too.
That's amazing.
And that just doesn't happen. Usually someone does something that they say they weren't going to do, or they change their mind and they don't give you any notice. There's just so many ways to be betrayed in the workplace.
Yep.
And a lot of people just don't have the integrity. They don't hold integrity. And so you are always a little suspicious. But this one it did my heart well.
Sadly, that feels like, to your point, it's an anomaly. How easy it is to go to the negative stories. Because I've been in this show a while, and I always ask that question, and 9 times out of 10, it's always from 20, 30 years ago, and it's almost trauma that they've been carrying with them for decades.
Yes.
But to hear those stories of how it's done well, I love asking the question, good or bad, because we can always learn from every one. It's just rare how often the good ones seem to come out. I think this lends itself real easily into our topic, because you did speak boldly. You did speak truth to power with a hell of an audience, but you still did. And so I think the first thing I need to ask, which I love defining things. It is a cornerstone of this show, is that we talk about stuff all the time, but we don't actually define what we're talking about. So in your words, how would you define speaking boldly?
Speaking boldly, let me tell you what it's not first.
Okay, that's always a good way to define it.
It's not about standing up, putting your hands on your hips, and, screaming at the top of your lungs in some kind of agitated way, right? I mean, often boldly is something that people think about where they're thumping their chest and they're saying, I'm right and you're wrong. Speaking boldly is not being afraid to say out loud the things that you are feeling and thinking with the goal of communicating. See, this is the thing. A lot of people are speaking, but they're really not trying to communicate. And so when I talk about speaking boldly, it's about what can you do? What kind of tools, what kind of tone, what kind of attitude and mentality can you bring to your conversation that allows the conversation to continue? Which is really what communication is about, right? If what you're saying shuts everybody up in the room, you probably are not speaking boldly.
How do you measure it then between a constructive and a non-constructive way of speaking boldly?
So one is, right, you shut up everybody. That's one way
Sure.
to know that it's not constructive,
Yeah.
or at least it hasn't invited engagement, or you have started a war. Those are two areas of like either quiet, like silence, or just lots and lots of feedback that isn't quite helpful, that takes us in the wrong direction. Now, when you know you're doing a pretty good job of communicating is when there's maybe not silence, but there's a pause, and then it's followed by a question or curiosity. And by the way, the other way to engage, right, is to learn how, when we say speaking boldly, that doesn't mean only like making statements. It also means, can you figure out that question, that open-ended, non-biased question that keeps an engagement going even when you know the person that you're talking to you don't agree with.
Hey, if you're enjoying the insights from our guests, you'll love our Raw Notes newsletter. It's packed with guest takeaways, the resources that inspire them, and my own tips on how we as leaders can be better humans for the humans that we're responsible for. Go to relationshipsatworkshow.com and subscribe now and help the workplace be more human. So what is a situation where you would need to speak boldly? Because not every situation demands it. I know people that will wait for a town hall and then vent everything that's ever bothered them in their lives to the entire organization. And I'm questions like, why are you not talking to your leader?
Meanwhile, right. Meanwhile, the leader's like, I asked a million times how people felt about this, right?
Yeah.
So speaking boldly is something that really can happen in so many places and with so many different audiences. It can be one-on-one. It can be that you have a coworker who just said something that you think is wrong. But you can see the implications of that opinion or that thought. Are you going to let it fly, just let it go? Or are you going to say, actually, tell me why you think that? Or where did you get that information? That's an example of speaking boldly versus just going, ha, 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 and then thinking, I don't want to be with this person, and this person doesn't believe and doesn't think like me. So it could be a one-on-one thing. It could be in a team meeting. It could be when the leader says, do people have any objections to the direction we're going in? And you have an objection, but you're worried about what to say or how to say it. And so either the leader doesn't give you enough time. So that's another thing as a leader that because I talk a lot. And so I have to remember as a leader that that's not my role a lot of times. I did this thing when I started working globally, and I realized that I had people on my team where English wasn't their best language as far as communication. Like they had another language that they would have been much more fluent in, or as a lot of people say, I'm really funny in my own language. And I realized that I had people on my team who were not feeling comfortable speaking. And so I would count 18 seconds after I asked a question. 18 seconds is like an eternity, especially for a person like me. But almost always before I got to 18, somebody found their voice. And it could have been an introverted person who was just like, I don't know, maybe, or it could be, like I said, a person who was dealing with a language difference or whatever. But sometimes people are processing differently. And so I learned to wait and give people the opportunity and the space to speak boldly. And it's always a brilliant idea. I mean, I'm like, I can't remember waiting for someone and thinking that was the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Why did I spend the time? Usually it's just like, wow, I didn't think about that.
I'm thinking on it from a preparatory standpoint too. So there are going to be moments where you need to speak boldly and you know you're going to have to. So you get a week. You get some time to sort of prepare yourself. And others, you're in the meeting, it comes up and you know you have to say something.
Yes.
So how can you prepare yourself in two very different situations where you have a lot of lead time and to get your mindset right,
Yes.
and others where the mindset has to be already in the right place or you might seem like you're ranting?
Yeah, if you've got some time to prepare, what you're doing is like your information gathering. You're thinking who's in the room and what are they thinking and what are their questions going to be and what might I say that could be misconstrued, and what's the context and what do I say first and what do I say second. And it's just, you just keep working it. You also try to figure out how not to make it be so long, and then you want to figure out how to follow up after you've actually given your statement or posed your questions. If it's on the fly or it's in the moment, this is where practice counts. So I often say to people, if you want to learn to speak boldly, you can do it in like low risk situations. You're with your friends, you're with your family. Depends on your family as to whether that's low risk or not.
True.
But
True.
you can figure out how to get in the right space in different situations that aren't so scary. And if you practice that, then you're much more capable of being able to deliver that kind of communication when it's in the it's spur of the moment. Like, for example, and I do a lot of work on like bias and the ways in which people are unintentionally saying things that are like making it very hard for folks to sit there in the room or whatever. And I learned to practice interrupting these kinds of biases. And by the way, when I say interrupting, I don't mean like you're giving a lecture or a workshop. I just mean you're just not letting the bias or the insult flow, right, without being interrupted. I used to practice with like taxi drivers. So if taxi drivers are listening, it's not like I'm trying to say like as a group there's a problem, but I have been in cars with people shouting at the pedestrians and saying some really terrible things. And so sometimes I would just kind of time getting out of it and paying and saying, excuse me, but I don't think we use that word anymore, and then like leaving. So as quickly as possible, because I'm thinking if you're going to say that about someone else, you're going to probably say that about me or my group or whatever. And so let's interrupt it. And by that practicing, I mean, I can come up to a group of strangers and we're having a conversation and they say things that, I mean, obviously I don't go after everything, but there are things that get said and you're like, that's wrong. And I have learned to say things like, wow, my experience is really different.
I like the framing of the I as well, because people get really defensive real fast, especially when we're talking about things around, you're kind of mentioning around the diversity side of things, or
politics.
Or huge these days. So there are going to be preconceived notions, there are going to be such baggage, and you don't know how they're handling that baggage. So to frame it as I feel, my experience, fellow communication nerd, right? So I hear that how that could be so much more like, you're putting less baggage on them.
Yes.
You're putting less shame and blame on them.
Yes.
So that they at least have a moment to go, oh, it's an other. It's something us together can sort of talk about.
Exactly. And also it's about having a few statements in your toolkit, right? So I have a couple of statements that will help me speak boldly. One is, what do you mean? Because sometimes you're just wrong about what someone means. And now you've gotten all huffy and, you're going on your soapbox and you do whatever, and that's not what they were talking about, right? And so I often ask, what do you mean? Sometimes it rarely makes it worse. It can make it worse because then they're like doubling down on something that you really think is bad, which isn't great. But it just gives space and opportunity. But it's also about curiosity. Like, are you really interested in what people think or what they mean? Because when you're sincere about it, then people kind of open. And when people open, then their hearts are kind of more open, their minds are more open, and then you can kind of arrive at a conclusion together. And it may not be that you end up agreeing, but you understand each other differently and often better. You're like, oh, I can see why that person is coming from that point of view. Yeah, so that's one. Also, I will say you have to manage your emotions. And I can't tell you how many folks who I'm just like, I don't know where we go, but I cannot help you because you have not figured out how to manage your emotions. You're like yelling and screaming and you're pouting, or you're being,
righteousness can
vengeful.
get in there as well.
Yeah. And you're like, that's not necessary. We don't have to go there. But I understand that people are tender about a lot of things. So also I believe compassion is part of speaking boldly, where you're just like, before deciding this is the worst person, this leader will never understand, this co-worker, no wonder they're like this, they come from this, whatever, all of the stuff that we tell ourselves that make us less interested in being curious in another human being. We have to learn to manage that talk, even overlook that talk, and then really come up with a leaning toward the person instead of away.
Being overly emotional, being self-aware enough to know you're being overly emotional. Is there situations maybe besides that where you shouldn't speak boldly?
Yes, I am certain there is. I make choices, definitely. And I make choices about, is this the right time? Is this the right audience? Am I okay? Am I coming from a spirit of compassion, or am I agitated, frustrated, angry, and therefore it's not going to come out right? So I often say to people, take a beat, because you can go back. You can go pick up a conversation. You could be like, remember we were at dinner the other night and that came up and I didn't know exactly what to say, but then I was thinking about it. So I would wonder if we could talk about it a little bit more, right? Because I wanted to share some of the things that came up for me. You can do that. You can go to someone's office. Hey, I think I stepped in it today. I didn't mean to do that, but I noticed it cut off all conversations. So I really want to hear what your thoughts are. Like, there are ways to come back. And so if you can't do it right away, right away helps, because if you got an audience, it means you don't have to go to all of that audience instead of say the same thing. But in a lot of times where it just isn't going to work, you're speaking in front of a person, they don't have their emotional control, they're going to use it against you, whatever. So it may not make sense, but don't drop it. Try to find other opportunities.
I love that you integrated vulnerability in there as well. Is that just sort of like, hey, let's talk about this thing. Yeah. More like, I had a moment. I wasn't prepared to talk to you yet. I had to do some thinking about that as well. And sometimes I think a lot of us as communicators have to understand that might not be the right audience either. Just because you're super angry or passionate about a thing that they just said, they still might not be the right person to talk to. Their superior could be, their colleague could be, or you're not the right messenger for it. That is also a big piece, is they need to hear that, but they don't need to hear it from you based on existing relationships.
Yes. That's such a great point, because a lot of times you may need a person to help you or support you, or often I say to people, and this is often for folks who feel like they don't have a lot of power in the dynamic, right? And they're like, no way, I can't say anything, I can't do anything. Is there a person you could talk to that you feel fairly certain would not use it against you, and that you could brainstorm with, and or who could be the person who does the speaking, or have a suggestion about how you would go about it and who else you would bring in. You know, the thing is that with leaders in particular, I know that I used to say this to my team all the time: I much prefer you come to me. But if I'm doing something that is making it seem like it's not a good idea to come to me, let me know that too, because I don't want to get some third party coming and saying you're really upset, blah, 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 because it just feels like I thought we were closer than that. I thought we had, but one does need to examine, like, what messaging are you sending?
And it informs you as a leader going, if they have to go to somebody else to tell me, then what am I not doing to make them feel like they can be safe? I often say that people talk about an open door policy. I'm like, the least important thing in that sentence is the door.
Yeah, exactly.
The door doesn't matter. It's, do people feel safe to walk in, regardless of the door? Can't believe we ran out of time. So I'm just going to wrap it up with one question. If somebody's maybe a little more on the timid side, or they're not a communications, there's tons of people I know in the technical sector who are not, this is just not their go-to. It's not their strength. What would you recommend to somebody in that space who's trying to be a better communicator in the realm of truth to power, speaking boldly? Where would you recommend they start?
I think you start with the fact that as a human being, you have the capacity to gain new skills. I mean, we all have what feels comfortable. We all have like what our personality is and when we feel like most secure, but that doesn't mean we don't add new skills to our toolkit, especially once we realize it's going to help us. So I would say, first of all, even though you may be introverted, that does not mean that you can't actually speak boldly. Now, you won't be necessarily standing up in the town square. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. But you can have a one-on-one conversation. You know how to do that. You can go to a person who you think models what you would like to see from this other person and say, how can I model this? Or tell me how I might share this information in a way that, and you can say this, like, I'm an introverted person. I'm not really sure how this works, but if you could help me, I see that you're not an introverted person. Women actually come up to me often, and they may be from like countries where women culturally are not given permission to really be forthright, or they're operating in a culture that's more direct and they're indirect. They have often come to me and like, I want to do what you just did. How do I do that? And mostly it's telling them that there's a unique version of this that will work for you. And the work is to find a number of pieces of information. So, there's so many good books, there's so many good videos, there's so many, good articles that you can read and then figure out which thing fits best for you.
Thanks, Verna.
Thank you.
That's it, we're done.
Awesome. I was like, oh.
And that will bring to a close the third part in our 6-part Work Human Live series. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Verna. I certainly did. First time I've ever gotten to meet her. And phenomenal. Absolutely my pleasure to just sit there and chat communications and speaking boldly. Absolutely loved my time with her. I hope you did as well. The hits just keep on coming. We've got part 4 coming out next Friday. That will be with Peter Andrew Danzig. We're going to be talking about ingredients to inclusion at work. Also, of course, our regular show, which happens Monday to Thursday, broken into 4 different segments around clarification, relationship with ourselves, relationship with our teams, and culture impacts. And next week's guest, Dr. Beth Kaplan. We're going to be talking about emerging versus tenured leaders and what belonging looks like. It's a really good one. I'm really excited to share it with you. How are you enjoying this new format? We're doing series left and right. We're doing a series Monday to Thursday that's just now operational, and we're also doing these Work Human Live series. We're returning to the solo series once the solos, they're not series anymore. They're solo. It's just the normal me talking to you about things, insights, and observations that I have. That's coming up after the Work Human Live series has concluded. But again, You liking it? You enjoying it? You love these shorter versions of the show? More targeted, maybe more value and impactful? I don't know. I have to hear from you. And I have already quite a bit. And I want to hear more. I'm curious. That's how we kick off every episode, is talking about curiosity. I'd love to hear how it's working for you. Just find me on social media, Relationships at Work, or of course, as usual, you can find me at my email, hello@russelllalliker.com. Love to hear from you. All right, I'll leave it there and talk to you again Monday. Take care.